Hello, everybody. As promised, I am now live with Charles, who has done some exceptional research on the JFK case. There are hundreds of books on the subject. He's read most of them, and he has compiled a video that's just over an hour long that is mind blowing because some of these photos he's purchased, spent a huge amount of money on, and he's enlarging them. And he's identified and detailed a second shooter. Is there anything you would like to add to that, Charles?
No, I think you covered it nicely, Sean. The only thing I would add is it's remarkable how our human mind works that no one else even thought to do this before. The plan was a very good one, and it was based on misdirection of magic, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah, it's just been hidden in plain sight, hasn't it, basically?
It has been hidden in plain sight. In fact,
All
the
right.
irony is of the picture taken, the original photographer was a man named Frank Cancellara. He did not take this photograph that we see that's up for the purpose of documenting the people in the foreground. He took the picture in the hope that he would catch the assassin in the photograph, and he just never looked at it carefully enough.
All right. Well, Charles has put a video up that's over an hour long. I'm going to stop and start it and get Charles's commentary and take questions from you, the viewers. So I'll play the first couple of minutes of it now.
This photograph was taken in Dealey Plaza 20 seconds after the fatal headshot struck President Kennedy. For 60 years, this image of the second assassin fired the fatal shot has been hiding in plain sight. This work is made under the fair use doctrine to present for the public interest in a non-profit manner facts recently discovered by my scholastic research. An exception to that has been my purchase of this high-resolution image from Getty Images. Video, I will reveal the ingenious criminal plan behind the assassination of President Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, to include proof of the plotter's possession of inside information regarding the motorcade route far in advance of the general public, as well as two major diversions, an unobstructed line of sight killing zone by using an unofficial roadblock, the involvement of one or more Dallas police officers, the clever use of a truck and an ordinary stepladder, the location of several members of the plot, the location and image of the second assassin in several magnifications, and where that gunman's rifle was hidden before and after the assassination, and how that second assassin was able to escape unnoticed through Commerce Street Arcade into a small gravel parking lot, and how this was made possible by crowds and police converging on the grassy knoll and on the Texas School Book Depository and ignoring the Commerce Street Arcade. All as a result using a 2-bit firecracker. I'll also identify a Dallas policeman who lied under oath to the Warren Commission and who I believe was the lookout for the second assassin. I'll prove this by citing his own testimony, by photographs taken just before and after the assassination, and by the testimony of Robert Davison, seen above on the triple overpass, who appears on camera here for the first time. Because of the newly discovered image, let's begin with the Commerce Street Arcade. Just inside the east end is a large utility closet. From that location would be an unobstructed field of fire which looks exactly up Elm Street. So as the president approached, his head would move neither to the left or right in the assassin's sight, much like shooting at a stationary target. And with its large steel doors, the steel utility cabinet would have been an excellent place to hide the weapon both before and after the assassination. And with the doors open and the shooter between them, it would have made a perfect rifle rest and virtual invisibility from 3 directions and good cover from the 4th to the east. In addition, an accomplice or accomplices stationed near the west end of the arcade on Main Street and dressed as either Dallas policemen or in fact Dallas policemen, could not only have prevented anyone from disturbing the assassin before or during the assassination, but by also blocking off Main Street west of the Triple Underpass, but also provided an unobstructed line of fire, an actual perfect killing zone for the assassin. Then after the final shot, the shooter would simply put the rifle back in the closet, walk out this arcade to the west into a gravel parking lot there, into their vehicle, and the rifle could be picked up in a few days. Therefore, from the plotter's point of view, the Commerce Street arcade was a nearly perfect location to shoot from. First major diversion, the arrival of the ambulance at 12:19 at 100 Houston Street, as seen here in the actual police radio log. Ostensibly, the ambulance was called to this location to pick up a person suffering an epileptic seizure. However, we know this is a false call because according to ambulance driver Aubrey Wright, he and other drivers on other shifts had been called to this very location on up to a dozen false ambulance calls in the days leading up to the assassination. This allowed the second shooter to get in place while everyone else in Dealey Plaza was distracted by the arrival of the ambulance. It also allowed the plotters in the days leading up to the assassination.
All right, Charles, I think this is quite a good point here to get the lay of the land. So you're saying then presidential motorcade is on this route. We've got shooter number 2 over here. You showed us earlier the images of the tunnel, etc. And then we've got Oswald, Texas School Book Depository at the top. And then this ambulance is providing some kind of diversion. Is that correct?
Exactly. Everyone is watching the ambulance. It's a classic magic trick. Look over here while the shooter is getting in place.
Now, from your research then, are you saying that there's only shooter number 2, or is it going to lead to there being even more shooters?
There could have been more than 2 shooters. The only 2 I have discovered is the one at the Commerce Street arcade, whose image we showed earlier, and we'll show again, and Lee Harvey Oswald. In fact, let me amend that. Let me call him Lee Oswald, because the Lee Harvey Oswald is just another example of the repetitiveness of this whole story. So no, there were 2 shooters. Oswald was guilty of sin. He just couldn't shoot straight.
All right, let me keep going then.
To practice and refine their plan, which would call for both shooters to fire simultaneously when the limousine reached a predetermined point. Should that fail to kill the president, a signalman would signal for additional shots and for the grassy knoll man to make the firecracker diversion. Had the first shots been fatal, there would have been no diversion, and the police would have converged only on the book depository to capture or kill Oswald in an open and shut case. Therefore, there would have been no need for Jack Ruby, and the public would have accepted the Lone Nut story completely. This also explains why Oswald didn't kill the president with the very easy shot as he approached on Houston Street, as is seen in this FBI recreation photo. The plotters had doubtlessly already told Oswald there would be an explosive diversion on the grassy knoll designed to allow his escape, while in reality, the plotters always intended him to be the patsy, and if all went as planned, a very dead patsy. Now we'll move on to the first shots. I say first shots, plural, because the first shot from the 6th floor shooter and the Commerce Street arcade assassin arrive almost simultaneously, with the 6th floor shot being determined by the reaction of the Secret Service agents to sound, while the Commerce Street shot's arrival being determined by President Kennedy's physical reaction, and both of these reactions being determined by examination of both the Zapruder film and this Elchin's photograph, with the latter, when combined with the through and through bullet hole in the windshield, making up the Rosetta Stone for understanding the existence and location of not only the second assassin, but also proof of foreknowledge of the assassination by agents of the United States government. As the president's reaction to being hit can first be seen in Zapruder frame 224, as he emerges from behind the Stemmons Freeway sign. The first frame in which he could be hit is probably number 210 or 211, while he is out of sight behind the sign. Now, looking at the Elchin's photograph, we see Jackie Kennedy's white-gloved hand on the president's forearm near his shirt cuff. As the position of her hand here does not appear until frame 254 of the Zapruder film, approximately 42 to 44 frames of film have elapsed since the president was first struck. So at a film speed of approximately 18 frames per second, we can determine the president was struck approximately 2 1/3 seconds before this Elchin's photo was taken. Also note in the upper right corner of the photo that the doors are opening on the off-white sedan as the vice president's Secret Service detail are reacting to the first audible gunshot coming from the book depository. As I would estimate 2 to 3 seconds would be required for those agents to first recognize what they were hearing and from which direction, and then to fumble with the door handle and then open the door. I think the minimum time required was at least 2 seconds and probably 3 or more, meaning that from the time of the sixth floor shot to when this photo was taken was anywhere from a fraction of a second to just over 1 second before the president was hit from the Commerce Street arcade. So I'll begin with the shot from the sixth floor of the book depository. Kennedy's limousine was now almost directly straight down. We know this because witnesses in front of the school book depository tell us that the limousine made the turn so wide it nearly hit the curb at the corner of Elm and Houston. So as we see in this photo, the sniper's nest is very cramped. So Oswald, or whomever was shooting from the sixth floor, who would have been following the president through the rifle scope, would have lost sight of him as they needed to sight downward almost vertically as the president's car went far out of sight to the north below, thus requiring them to break their rhythm and hurriedly reacquire the president in their scope sight picture and thereby rush their first shot. And where this plan went awry is they were probably practicing with a full-size luxury car like a Cadillac or a Lincoln. They had not taken into account the extra long wheelbase of this presidential limousine. It was 3.5 feet longer than a stock Lincoln Continental, meaning it had the wheelbase out of a delivery truck and so had the turning radius of a delivery truck, and thus instead of turning into the center lane on Elm Street, it went far to the north and therefore was almost straight down from the shooter's nest. Thus, having to hurriedly acquire the target in his scope, the assassin rushes his shot and misses, hitting the pavement, as seen by one of the railroad workers, one policeman, and several curbside witnesses. The second shot, and the first fired by the Commerce Street arcade shooter, penetrated the limousine's windshield and struck the president in the throat, entering under his knot in his tie and exiting his back about 2 inches to the right of his spine. That shot was fired over the open utility cabinet door inside of the Commerce Street pedestrian arcade. The shot passed from the Commerce Street arcade to the limousine, and you can see that they line up perfectly. After exiting the president's back, the bullet would have either hit the street or bounced harmlessly off the Daltex building. In this famous Elchin's photograph taken about 2 seconds after the shot, we see where the bullet strikes the window, and in a close-up view, we see where the bullet actually has penetrated through and through the window. We know this was a bullet hole because it was seen by 2 Dallas policemen, Officer Stavis Ellis, who actually recalled putting a pencil into the hole, and Officer H.R. Freeman, who observed the limousine at Parkland Hospital and stated, I was right beside it. I could have touched it. It was a bullet hole. Dr. Evelia Glanges, a medical student at the rear of Parkland Hospital near the emergency room exit where the limousine was parked, saw the hole and said to friends, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield." Dr. Glanges also stated that she had been around guns since her childhood and that the hole was a front to back, through and through bullet hole. St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Richard Dudman saw the hole close up at Parkland Hospital before he was shoved away by a Secret Service agent. After the limousine had been flown back to Washington, the hole was also seen by Secret Service agent Joe Palello, who was guarding it in the White House garage. And finally, on November the 25th, the day of the president's funeral, by George Whitaker of the Ford Motor Company, who actually replaced the windshield of the limousine at the River Rouge plant. He said the hole was 4 to 6 inches to the driver's side of the car from the rear view mirror. Whitaker, with 40 years experience working with automotive glass, said that the hole entered from the front of the glass toward the rear. We see here the president reacting to being struck in the throat, and you can clearly see his left fist being risen to his chin. As evidenced by his dress shirt, we can see where the bullet penetrated just under his tie to wound the president in the throat. In this image, we see how the bullet entered through the windshield, passed between both Secret Service agents and Governor Connally and his wife to strike the president in the throat and exit about 2 inches to the right of his spine. Please note that Governor Connally was sitting about 4 to 6 inches lower than the president, as you can clearly see in this first and in the second photo. There is a much greater distance between the two men than the previous diagram would indicate. In this FBI recreation, we see that with the very steep slope of Elm Street, that the bullet from the Commerce Street arcade would line up perfectly with both the windshield and the FBI agent posing as Mr. Kennedy. Because I don't recall seeing either a still photograph or a film of Dealey Plaza which adequately conveys just how dramatically Elm Street slopes down, I took this video from atop the triple underpass to give the viewer a sense of just how steep the street really is. We can establish that one bullet made both the wound in President Kennedy's neck and in his back, because as it transited the body, it made a bruise on top of the right lung. However, as no bullets were found inside the body, it could only be a single bullet that entered and exited. As the bullet was probably of an armor-piercing variety, it made a perfect hole through the front windshield, then traveled under the knot in the president's tie to make a perfectly round entry wound in the president's neck, as observed by the physicians at Parkland Hospital. However, it's later noted that the autopsy at Bethesda Hospital, upon exiting the back, the bullet made an oblong wound of...
We know it was a windshield through and through shot, and we know where it hit him, just under his tie, striking him in the center of the throat and exiting out his back. We know it was an entry wound because his nervous system tells us that. If you were to be punched in the stomach, you would go like this. It's just a normal reaction. If, however, you were poked in the throat with someone's finger or a bullet, you would go like this. Your muscles would contract toward it. If, however, and imagine this, you were punched or shot between the shoulder blades, you would react like that. Your back muscles would contract. Can you remember when someone has put ice down your neck as a joke sometimes? You don't pull forward. You pull back because it's painful. If he had been shot in the back, he would have pulled back, but he didn't. He pulled forward.
As we see here in Zapruder frame 228, the president is reflexively reacting forward after being hit in the throat from the front. On the left, we see the perfectly round entry hole in the president's throat as seen by the doctors at Parkland Hospital. On the right, we see that same entry wound after a small incision was cut across it in order to insert a tracheotomy tube.
All right, I'm just going to pause here, Charles, because we've got a lot more people watching now. And for people who have tuned in, I'm with Charles, who's done a phenomenal job. Well, actually, I don't know if you can see the chat, but they're all saying the level of detail you're providing here, Charles. They're really, it's blowing people's minds, the quality of your research.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and Charles has got, we're going to get to the photos that he obtained, that he paid for, that he enlarged and has identified a second shooter. I know a lot of questions have come in. We will put those questions to Charles when we finish the video. The video itself is over an hour long. And so we're going to keep going with that. But is there anything you would like to add at this point, Charles?
We are going to come up upon a censored image, which I took out to follow within YouTube's guidelines. It is a picture of President Kennedy on an autopsy table at Bethesda, and the wound that we see highlighted by the blue arrow does not look like the clean wound there, as testified to by the Dallas emergency room physicians and nurses, of which there were 14. And the Bethesda autopsy photo, that has been greatly enlarged, and it's a very gross looking wound. Someone has tampered with it before the autopsy. So I just wanted to get that in.
Okay, and my question for you at this point then is, you've analyzed this shot from the second shooter. Is that the shot that you believe finished him?
No, this was the first shot that wounded him, and he pulls his arms up. I believe both shots that hit Mr. Kennedy came from the Commerce Street arcade. However, Oswald was shooting, but he may have got the back of President Kennedy's with some residual particles of a bullet jacket from his second shot, but Oswald did hit Governor Connally with a shot that tumbled, and I'll go into detail in that in the video in just a couple of minutes.
All right.
But the fatal shot was fired by the Commerce Street arcade shooter. He only fired 2 shots, but he was a very good shot.
All right. And I've also put the link to Charles's YouTube channel. He's got a brand new channel with more videos. So if people want to watch the rest of his videos or subscribe to Charles, go down to that link if you're watching this on YouTube. We're going to continue the video.
The president's body left Parkland Hospital. The wound looked like the image on the right. In a recent documentary entitled JFK, What the Doctor Saw, we learned that Dr. Malcolm Perry, after stating at a news conference after the president's death at Parkland Hospital that the wound in the throat was an entry wound, Dr. Perry was threatened by a Secret Service agent to never call that wound an entry wound again if he knew what was good for him. Here we see the wound on the president's back on the actual autopsy sheet, Bethesda Naval Hospital. Misidentifies as an entry wound instead of an exit wound because they had been informed by both the FBI and the Secret Service that the president had been shot from above and behind, to later be altered in the Warren Commission report by Warren Commission member Gerald Ford, who elevated the wound 5 inches in order to make magic bullet theory plausible. Doctors Humes and Boswell, both Navy commanders, and Pierre Fink, an Army lieutenant colonel, tried to probe the back wound with a medical probe to trace the bullet track, but were unable to trace that bullet path to a depth of no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. This is because, as you can see in the photograph shown, the president had his right elbow up on the side of the car, thus elevating the trapezius, the scapular, and all the other scapular muscles. Thus, when the body was returned to a supine position on an autopsy table, the scapula and those muscles would have descended to cover that bullet track. Here we again see where the pathologist had located that back wound. By moving that back wound onto an anatomical drawing, we can see why the pathologist could not probe either the wound or its bullet track to a depth of more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. They were striking the scapula in its normal resting position. However, recall the president had his elbow up, thus lifting the scapula, as can be seen in this anatomical representation. Thus, when the president was shot in the throat, the bullet had transited through his chest, bruised the top of his right lung, and exited underneath the now uplifted scapula. Thus, with the president's body in a supine position on an autopsy table, the scapula would have been lowered into its normal resting position to completely cover and hide the bullet track. Once again, when the president is shot, his elbow is up on the side of the car, elevating the scapula, allowing the bullet to pass under the scapula and out through the back. And once the scapula returns to its normal relaxed position, the scapula descends and completely obscures and hides the bullet track. Since we know the bullet came from the front, now let's determine what direction it came from. And how can we do that? The president's tie, in addition to the wound in the back, tells us. How does the tie do this? For the bullet entered, as shown in the simulation above, just under the president's tie, making a tiny nick in the left side of the knot. If we trace back through the pointer, the bullet came through the windshield, and that point points directly back to the Commerce Street arcade. But now, when our pointer traces back to the direction from which a shot at the grassy knoll would have come from, to hit the president in the same position, in the throat, under the tie, the bullet would have had to have gone through the tie. And since there was no bullet hole through the center of the knot on the tie, just the tiny nick under the left side of the tie, we know once again that the grassy knoll is a red herring. Earlier during the autopsy, the pathologists attempted to trace the bullet track of the neck wound and were told to stop doing that and go on to the next procedure. When the body left Dallas, the throat wound looked like the image on the right, tiny bullet hole with a very neat incision through it. However, at Bethesda, it looked like this. The sixth floor shooter must now shoot down through the intervening foliage of the trees. As seen in this FBI recreation, the bullet hits a branch, tumbles, and fragments, hitting Governor Connally, while a tiny lead fragment of the bullet's inner core and multiple pieces of the bullet's outer shattered copper jacket struck President Kennedy in the head, scalp, and in the right cheek, with 3 tiny fragments which punctured 3 holes in his cheek, which was only discovered after the autopsy by Gawler Funeral Home mortician Edwin Strobel, when he noticed that embalming fluid was leaking out through the president's cheek and those holes were plugged. Portion that struck Governor Connally tells us the bullet was tumbling because it has an oblong shape as it penetrates Connally's shirt. Because it hit the tree and fragmented, one fragment hitting the inside windshield trim as shown here. And in a closer perspective, we see that it indeed did heavily dent the window trim, and the fragment was later found on the front floor of the car, along with several other smaller fragments. From the front of the car, as we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the bullet hole from shot number 2, we see 3 more smaller fragment fractures that were made on the inside of the window, which are much more easily seen from the outside. Again, the bullet hole was through and through. These 3 fragments were part of the third bullet that fragmented and tumbled and damaged only the inside. Here we see a 6.5 millimeter round taken from Oswald's rifle. Please notice the unusual length of the bullet, which is copper jacketed. Here we see a fairly typical example of how a copper jacketed bullet is constructed, and we see examples of what happens to that copper jacket when the bullet strikes something hard like a branch. And if the bullet then tumbles, how small pieces of the jacket are then spun off making the 4 defects shown here, of which numbers 1, 2, and 4 are in the glass on the inside, and defect number 3 is the large dent in the window trim. These multiple fragments spinning and ricocheting around the inside of the car may explain why Special Agent Kellerman testified before the Warren Commission that, quote, a flurry of shots came into the car. Here we see the umbrella man. You can see the president's limousine approach. His job was to signal the diversion man on the grassy knoll to make it, and also the second shooter at the Commerce Street Arcade that the president still alive and that a second shot was necessary. The 4th shot and the 6th floor shooter's third misses Kennedy completely and hits the curb on Main Street, and the bullet fragments, and either fragments of the bullet or concrete chips off of the curb, hit Mr. Tague in the cheek where he is standing on the north side of Commerce Street. Note that when we look from the second shooter's location, if we go to the south, it really wouldn't have been anywhere for an assassin to hide. Here we see, as indicated by the green arrow, where the 6th floor shooter has missed and struck the curb, and as indicated by the blue arrow, where chips from the curb or fragments from that bullet struck James Tague. The shooter who fired both the next shot and the fatal shot is at this location. Now, this is very important because we see the time of the fatal shot. This is where Mr. Kennedy is at. And what is more important is the attitude of Mr. Kennedy's head, that is to say, which way his head is turned. Now, this is the location where the red arrow is of our actual shooter at the Commerce Street Arcade opening. This is extremely important because only these angles make the entire wounds on Mr. Kennedy's head line up at all. And according to the calculations done by NASA Space Division engineer Thomas Canning, award-winning computer animator Dale Myers, whose work was reviewed and confirmed by the Z-Axis Corporation, the president's head was turned about 26 degrees to the southwest from his line of travel. As we now add in with the black line the path fatal headshot that struck Mr. Kennedy in the temple. I will simply place an overlay of Mr. Kennedy's head approximating the position of the limousine at the fatal headshot, showing both his line of sight and where the fatal headshot would have. And we see the shot angle is consistent with striking the president in the temple. We know that the fatal headshot hit President Kennedy in the temple for several reasons. The first of these was the observation of the Parkland emergency physicians that they relayed to Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff, who is seen here during an emergency press conference given immediately after the president's death at Parkland Hospital, where Kilduff points to his own temple, indicating the entry wound on the president's head. One of those emergency room physicians present at Parkland, who saw the president's head wound from probably less than 2 feet away, was Dr. Charles Crenshaw, seen here in a documentary filmed years later, indicating the location of the entry wound. And here we see Mr. Bill Newman pointing to his temple to indicate where the president was struck. Mr. Newman, along with his wife Gail and their 2 children, were the closest witnesses to the president when he was struck by the fatal headshot. In addition, Dr. Jim Jenkins relates how, as a young Navy corpsman at Bethesda Hospital back in 1963, he assisted at the actual autopsy of the president and saw for himself that the entry wound was in the president's right temple. This is in addition to much investigation done over the last 60 years by many crime scene investigators and physicians. So we see the president's same position just before the fatal headshot, looking to the southwest. The bullet strikes him high in the temple, his right side, and exits on the right rear of his head.
I'm just going to pause here, Charles, because a few things have occurred. Did you earlier on say that the wound had been altered? It went in with one wound and he came out with another, the corpse.
The neck wound had definitely been altered. There's no question about it. And the head wound was just misreported. In fact, the Bethesda autopsy does not show a photograph of the rear exit wound in the president's head. It shows a drawing of the photograph of the rear exit wound, or excuse me, entry wound in the president's head, because there was no entry wound. It was a massive exit wound in the back of his head, in the right rear. It blew out a piece about as big as a baseball or an orange. And
All right.
I go into that in just the next few minutes.
And you got a question from Purple Groovy asking about the magic bullet.
Magic bullet was nonsense. That was created by Gerald Ford, who had raised the bullet wound in the back and tried to explain that bullet wound. He had raised it 5 inches by his own admission on the autopsy sheet. Gerald Ford, the future president, congressman at that time, raised the bullet wound 5 inches and called it an entry wound instead of an exit wound. And Arlen Specter, who was committee counsel, then came up with the magic bullet theory that the bullet had come from the back, penetrated Mr. Kennedy's shoulder strap through his trapezius, and then had tumbled and entered Governor Connally, creating all those wounds. It's just nonsensical, and always was. It just doesn't work.
No, they believe that the people are just going to swallow that. All right, let's keep going.
Making a massive wound as seen by all of the Dallas doctors. The grassy knoll shot was impossible because the angles are all wrong. If the shot were from the grassy knoll and hit Mr. Kennedy in the temple, it would have blown out most of the left side of his head. To illustrate this, we set up a mannequin in a mock Dealey Plaza set to scale, with the mannequin head at 26 degrees to the direction of the travel of the limousine, as Mr. Kennedy's head would have been in relation to the grassy knoll. From that scaled out position, we then fired 2 rounds, one from a 30-06 bolt action rifle and one from an AR-15 5.56 millimeter rifle.
Fire in the hole, 30-06. Fire in the hole, AR-15.
Here we can see the entry point of the AR-15 round. And here we can see our test 30-06 round entry point. However, when I take the mannequin head and turn it, we see our 30-06 exit and our AR-15 exit. In other words, they transited the head in a straight line. However, the doctors at Parkland saw a massive head wound like this coloration on the right rear of the head. If that were true and the bullet ended here,
from the grassy knoll, it would have had to have made an impossible 90-degree turn. We're looking at Mr. Kennedy from the northwest, and that would have been the general direction which the shot from the grassy knoll would have come from, towards southeast. That's inconsistent with the actual wounds seen by Parkland, which blows out the right rear of Mr. Kennedy's head, about the size of a baseball or a fist, as seen by the Parkland doctors. Here we see the actual Zapruder frame where the fatal shot impacts the president's head. Notice how Mrs. Connally has pulled Governor Connally down left side of the car and has lowered them both. Now, lately, to allow for the slope of Elm Street, now we see the path of the fatal bullet. Fired from the Commerce Street arcade, it goes over the windshield, under the crossbar, and strikes President Kennedy in the right temple. We can see how the bullet track from the Commerce Street arcade struck the president in the head. In the next photo, we see that the president was indeed seated quite high in the automobile. And in this final photo, recreation of the crime, showing the slope of Dealey Plaza, the yellow line clearly demonstrates that the president's head would have been higher than the front windshield. Viewing the fatal headshot path from the 6th floor sniper's nest reinforces just how intelligent this crime was planned. For both riflemen are shooting parallel with the president's path. A wound in the same plane is much easier to explain away than a wound which comes in from the side. A diversion of criminal genius. This is the approximate location where the simulating a gunshot with a loud report, a very bright flash, and much smoke that is still hanging in the air some seconds later as photographed here. Modern ammunition simply doesn't do this. That's why its gunpowder, its propellant, is called smokeless powder. James Tague, who was standing on the north curb of Commerce Street, even with the triple underpass, and directly facing the fence on the grassy knoll. Mr. Tague testified, "About this time, I heard what sounded like a firecracker. Well, a very loud firecracker. It certainly didn't sound like a rifle shot. It was more like of a loud cannon type sound. I looked around to see who was throwing firecrackers or what was going on, and I turned my head away from the motorcade and, of course, 2 more shots." And then there's Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman explains how, after hearing the shots, he ran across Dealey Plaza to the area of the grassy knoll and tried to the west of the grassy knoll and burnt his hand. He had seen or heard anything during the passing of the president. He said he thought he saw somebody throw something through a bush, and that's when I went back over the fence. I think that railroad yardman saw somebody throw a firecracker. That this was a firecracker is supported by Railroad Supervisor Sam Holland, seen above here on the triple underpass, who testified before the Warren Commission. There was a shot, a report. I don't know whether it was a shot. I can't say that. And a puff of smoke came out about 6 or 8 feet above the ground, right from under those trees. And at just about the location from where I was standing, you could see that puff of smoke, like someone had thrown a firecracker or something out. And it was just about the way it sounded. It wasn't as loud as the previous reports or shots. Ironically, in the 1967 documentary on the assassination by Mark Land entitled Rush to Judgment, Holland is put forth as one of the single most important witnesses for the existence of the shot from the grassy knoll, this being an almost exact contravention of his Warren Commission testimony 3 years earlier. Then there's Marilyn Sitzman, who, as an employee of Abraham Zapruder, her location is highlighted here by the green arrow, where she was standing next to Zapruder helping to steady him as he shot his famous film. According to her, she heard only 3 shots over her left shoulder coming from the direction of the book depository. She was adamant that no high-powered rifle shot came from the grassy knoll. The theoretical location from which such a shooter would have been positioned, denoted by the red arrow above, approximately 25 feet or less from where she was standing. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Robert Davison, as seen above on the triple underpass, and as videoed here on film for the first time, is perhaps one of the most honest of all the Dealey Plaza witnesses, who describes what he saw and heard that day.
I did not hear the shots at all, not hear any shots. I particularly did not hear the shot that did kill Kennedy, because the Kennedy car was surrounded. There were 7 motorcycles and all going vroom, 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 because they were going at a relatively slow speed, and there was so much noise by those motorcycles that I never heard a shot. I did, however, when the final shot was made on Kennedy, I did see a great big puff of smoke coming from the bushes behind the grassy knoll.
So once again, we hear testimony from a very credible witness about a very large puff of smoke, but again without a corresponding simultaneous rifle report. The reason for that is simple. There wasn't one, only the pop of a firecracker. Also, please note that Robert is correct. There were 7 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, 3 of them out in front as seen here, and 4, 2 each along each rear fender of the presidential limousine. The reason for the smoke and flash diversion was to pull everyone's attention to the grassy knoll and away from the second assassin's actual location, and it worked perfectly. Everyone converges on the grassy knoll and completely ignores the actual assassin at Commerce Street. Beginning with Lee Bowers, I'll demonstrate why there was too much smoke seen for it to have come from a modern rifle. Lee Bowers was located in a railroad control tower approximately 270 feet behind the grassy knoll. That's what Lee Bowers had to say about what he saw. There was a flash of light or something I couldn't identify. Some unusual occurrence, a flash, light, or smoke, or something which caused me to feel something out of the ordinary had occurred there. We've designed a scaled-out experiment, and from 270 feet, we will fire a 30-06 rifle, an AR-15 rifle, and then a pyrotechnic device.
Fire in the hole, 30-06.
Yes.
Fire in the hole, AR.
Pyrotechnic. Next, we'll return to those witnesses standing on top of the triple underpass, approximately 120 to 125 feet from where they saw smoke come out from under the trees from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. As these are the most cited witnesses for the possibility of a gunman on the grassy knoll, again in a scaled-out demonstration from a distance of 120 feet, we will test a 30-06 rifle, an AR-15 rifle, and a pyrotechnic.
Fire in the hole, 30-06. Fire in the hole, AR.
And the pyrotechnic. And indeed, here we see that same smoke captured several seconds after the final shot. For we know there was an imposter on the grassy knoll posing as a Secret Service agent who identified himself to Dallas Police Officer Smith and Dallas Deputy Sheriff Weitzman by producing Secret Service credentials when in fact no Secret Service agent was present on the grassy knoll. Now moving to the second assassin's actual location at the eastern portal of the Commerce Street Arcade.
All right, before we go to the second assassin's location again, a few people in the chat, Charles, are asking about the possibility of a shooter in the vehicle.
No. No, that what I don't mean to be unequivocal. I mean to be unequivocal about that, but not arrogant. What I have done is I didn't come to this with a theory. I just traced the bullet tracks. It's just simple geometry. I just went with the proof. I didn't theorize. I just followed back straight lines to their origin. That's all I did.
And you've touched on the diversionary tactics, firecrackers, ambulances. How many diversionary tactics were employed on that day?
There were only 2 that I saw, but those were just the 2 that I discovered. There could have been more. There could have been a third shooter. I have just never found proof of him. So I don't want to say there was. But I think the second shooter was of such ability that when Mr. Kennedy came around the corner, he was dead.
Wow.
And remember when that car turned onto Elm Street, it's hard to tell from video, but the car is coming directly at the Commerce Street Arcade opening, directly at the assassin. So Mr. Kennedy's head would not move either to the left or right. it would come straight at you, straight at you. And so it would be a very easy shot. For people who have ever done any trap shooting or anything with shotguns, they'll understand. A bird that goes to the right or the left is much harder to shoot than a bird that goes straight away.
All right, and viewers, please keep putting your questions in the chat. We'll get those to Charles at the end of the video. We have got another 30 minutes of the video, so I shall continue. Fascinating.
Second rifleman would have been 2 to 2.5 feet higher than the camera position from which this photo was taken. So the shooter could easily shot over the top of the limousine windshield, which was lower than the president's head, owing to the slope of the street and the high seating height of the president in the back seat. Frankly, I think that assassin could have cared less about shooting over the windshield or not, simply because if he had to shoot through the windshield a second time, the investigating agency would just cover it up like they did with the first bullet hole. And remember, these doors were fairly new back in 1963 and would have been a metallic gray in color and just about indistinguishable from the pillars themselves. In 3 magnifications, this is the image I discovered of a man in flight in the Frank Consolari photograph. And this is very interesting because 20 seconds after the president is shot, hundreds of people are coming into Dealey Plaza, but this man is leaving. This is...
Wow, okay. So we're getting into where you've identified people now in the photos. Just pausing that so people can have a good look. Man outlined in blue, ladder in green. Anything you'd like to add to that one, Charles?
This was very hard for me to figure out at first. When I saw it, and I have to say that for some people, they may have to play with shading in their computers to see this image, if they indeed could have a high enough quality image. But I'm partially colorblind, so I probably spotted, in fact, I'm heavily colorblind. I probably spotted this more quickly than other people, even though there are, it's in black and white, there are tonalities to it that I think my eye picked up first. But once your brain does pick up the image, almost everyone can clearly see that it is unmistakably a man in flight. And what's interesting, and what was a puzzle to me, is what he is carrying. And once I figured that out accidentally, but we can go to that later.
All right, let's keep going.
Very suspicious, as curiosity is such a powerful motivator. There are 2 things I can absolutely say about the man in this image. The first thing is he's wearing very light colored clothing because it's very dark in that arcade. He would not even show up unless he was wearing a very light set of coveralls or khakis. The second thing we can say about him is he's carrying a wooden step ladder upside down in a manner like this, with the wooden diagonal cross brace on the back going across his forearm just above his wrist. Yes, it's very blurry, but I think you can make out the step ladder. And if you need time, just hit the pause button. Returning to Lee Oswald, Oswald said he was the patsy, and he was a patsy. I don't believe Oswald killed President Kennedy, that he was the 6th floor shooter. But whether he was or wasn't, he was involved with the plot. Here's why. Using logic, we can establish that Oswald was at least involved with the plot, or if, as Oswald claims, he was only being set up as the patsy, the plotters would have to have absolute advanced knowledge that Oswald would not be seen outside the Texas School Book Depository during the shooting by any other witnesses, or he would have been impossible to frame as the patsy. And the only way the plotters could possibly known that in advance for certain was if Oswald was working in concert with them. We also know that Oswald was keenly interested in politics, yet at the epicenter of one of the greatest political events in American history, Lee Oswald suddenly leaves. He returns to his rooming house, changes his clothing. Was this an attempt to change his appearance? and also arms himself with a .38 caliber revolver. Some advocates of Oswald's innocence hold that Oswald left because he feared he was being framed as the patsy for the president's murder. But why would he have feared that unless he knew there was a plot to which he could be connected? At any rate, within 15 minutes of that, Officer Tippit is shot dead, and Oswald is seen acting so suspiciously that a shoe store employee calls the police. Texas Theater, Oswald draws his revolver, points it at the police, and tries to fire it. And once in custody, Oswald was tested for nitrates on his right hand, and he tested positive, suggesting that he had fired a weapon. Skeptics countered that in regard to President Kennedy's death, Oswald was tested for nitrates on his face and he tested negative. And it's also very possible that whoever administered that test to Oswald's face wasn't the most competent policeman in the world. Because after all, this was 1963 and the Dallas Police Department still didn't even have a tape recorder to tape record Oswald's interrogation.
Charles, do we know who shot Officer Tippit dead?
Oswald.
Okay.
And here is why. Skeptics say, well, Oswald didn't kill the president because he didn't have nitrates on his face. But Oswald returned to the rooming house where he lived from the school book depository and changed his clothing and picked up a .38. He could have easily washed his face. Then Oswald later has nitrates on his hands because he had shot Tippit after he had washed his face. Why would he have nitrates on his hand? He had used that revolver.
And the motive for shooting Tippit was he was about to be apprehended by him?
That I don't know. That would just be speculation. I don't know if Tippit was part of the plot, if Tippit was simply unlucky, or if Tippit was set up to assassinate Oswald and something went haywire. I don't know.
Gotcha,
Something went wrong in the plot. What it was, I don't know.
Okay.
In regard to President Kennedy, if Oswald didn't fire the shot from the 6th floor, who did? No one else was ever apprehended fleeing or seen fleeing the 6th floor. He was seen on the 6th floor after 12 o'clock, and the president was shot at 12:30. In addition to that, it was his rifle. And why did he have that rifle in the first place? Did he buy it for self-protection? He already had a revolver. Did he express an interest in target shooting? None that he ever said anything about. Or was he going deer hunting? And if he weren't up to something nefarious, why did Oswald order the gun under an alias from a Chicago mail-order retailer? And not only that, under questioning, Oswald even denied even owning a rifle or buying any rifle under any name. Yet pictures exist of him holding the rifle that were taken by Marina Oswald. Oswald aside, further indications that the assassination of the president was a multi-person conspiracy.
Uh-oh.
So, is the audio, I need to forward it.
We know the shooter.
Here we go. Yeah, the audio went up.
The
It's coming back.
shooter's knowledge that it was permissible to shoot through the windshield because any bullet holes in that windshield would be covered up by any subsequent investigation. And because of all those false ambulance calls, we know the shooters had been practicing and had specific knowledge of the route long before it was published for the general public. Here we see evidence of even more insider collusion because the Secret Service violated its own protocol rules on motorcades by exceeding 90 degrees for a right or left-hand turn with their 120-degree turn. Their excuse for this was they had to make that turn onto Elm to get onto the Stemmons Freeway. But if they had simply turned 2 blocks earlier, they could have gotten onto Elm Street using only two 90-degree turns. If they had done that, coming down Elm Street, the limousine would have been going much faster than it was after it had to make that 120-degree turn and slow way down going into the Elm Street kill zone so that Oswald and the Commerce Street arcade shooter had a nice slow moving target. They also required a co-conspirator for whatever utility performed electrical maintenance in that utility cabinet for 3 reasons. They needed a key to the cabinet as it was locked, and they needed to know the maintenance schedule of the workers doing such maintenance so that they could be practicing without discovery and be assured the rifle hidden there would not be discovered before or in the days immediately after the assassination. Also, in order to avoid discovery when setting up immediately before and during the assassination, a co-conspirator had to be stationed at the west end of the pedestrian tunnel. Such a conspirator was probably dressed in maintenance overalls or as a member of some police agency. As to Dallas police officers we can locate on the ground in Dealey Plaza, west of Houston Street and west of the Triple Underpass, by their Warren Commission testimony, there is Officer Harkness, Officer J.W. Foster, stationed on the eastern side of the Triple Underpass, Officer Murphy on the north end of the Stemmons Freeway overpass, Officers Lomax and E.V. Brown on the railroad overpass over the Stemmons Freeway, and I've saved these 2 officers for last. Officer J.C. White on the west side of the Triple Underpass on the western edge of Dealey Plaza, and a mystery officer on Main Street with the 3-wheeler who has closed off the traffic there. Unidentified officer, shown here in frames from both the Bell and Daniels film, was never called before the Warren Commission, even though he had a much better viewpoint as a witness than either Officer Joe E. Murphy or Officer E.V. Brown, who were called to testify. But not only wasn't he called, he's never even mentioned or identified in any of the other officers' testimonies. Just who is this guy? What makes him even more interesting to me is that he is the officer located closest to the Commerce Street arcade shooter's escape route. He has an unobstructed view of the west exit of the Commerce Street arcade, only about 120 feet away. The other officer nearest the Commerce Street arcade is Officer J.C. White, and I think you'll find his testimony very interesting. Committee Counsel Ball asks him, "Where were you?" Mr. White responds, "On the west side of the overpass." Mr. Ball said, "On the west side of the overpass?" White says, "Yes." Ball asks, "Where were you with reference to Elm, Main, or Commerce Street as they go underneath the overpass?" Mr. White says, "Approximately at the north curb of Main Street." Thus, looking at an aerial photo of the Triple Underpass, Officer White would be right at the red arrow location. However, when we look at a photograph taken by Mel McIntyre seconds after the presidential limousine has passed out from underneath the Triple Underpass, we notice that the location of Main Street and the north curb on the top of the overpass, there doesn't appear to be any sign of Officer White. In fact, it appears that he is over the south curb of Main Street on the west side of the Triple Underpass. So when looking at an aerial photo of the Triple Underpass, we notice that instead of being here, Officer White is over here, much nearer to the point at which our second assassin escaped from the Commerce Street arcade. Just so there was no mistake, Ball even went back and asked White to initial his position on a diagram that had been just made by Officer Foster. And again, he responds when asked on the north curb of Main Street. But reading from the actual Warren Commission testimony, we see that's not the only one of Officer White's interesting answers. Mr. Ball, did you see the president's car come into sight? Mr. White, no, sir. First time I saw it, it has passed under the triple underpass. Mr. Ball, you were too far away to see it, were you? Mr. White, there was a freight train traveling. There was a train passing between the location I was standing and the area from which the procession was. A big, long freight train, and I did not see it. You didn't see the procession? No, sir. This seems really strange because in both the Bell and the Weitzman films taken just as the president's car is under the triple underpass, there is no train visible. Even more tellingly, from this Phil Willis slide, we see the presidential motorcade heading down Elm Street, and the president hasn't even been hit with the first shot. Yet, even though the president is 10 seconds away from the triple underpass, when we zoom in on the upper left-hand corner of the photo, there is no train on the triple underpass. Looking from the west side of the underpass in a photograph taken 10 or 12 seconds later by Mel McIntyre, we can clearly see the presidential limousine. But again, where's the train? From where he was located on the Stemmons Freeway, Officer Murphy could see both the president's motorcade turning off of Main Street onto Houston, and then again off of Houston onto Elm. It would have taken a minimum of 12 seconds and perhaps as much as 15 for the presidential limousine to go from Main Street to Elm Street on Houston. So even if there had been the very tail end of a southbound train blocking Officer White's view at the first point at which Officer Murphy saw the president's limousine turn from Maine to Houston, certainly in the next 12 to 15 seconds, Officer White should have been able to see the presidential limousine turn from Houston onto Elm and come down Elm Street, because the tail end of any southbound train would now have been well out of his way to the south. And remember, it could have only been the southbound train because in the Mel McIntyre photo, we see there is no northbound train. But that's not what Officer White testifies. He testifies that he did not see the presidential limousine until it emerged from underneath the triple underpass, because he could not see it because his view was blocked by a train. Officer White then compounds the lie. Mr. Ball, did you hear any shots? Mr. White, no, sir. Mr. Ball, didn't? Mr. White, no, sir. Mr. Ball, first time you saw the president's car was going underneath? Yes, sir. What did you do after that? White, as soon as the train passed, I went over and on the northwest side of the depository building, on the northwest side of the bookstore up there with the rest of the officers. And after about 30 minutes, they told me to go out and work traffic at Main and Houston. And I stood out there and worked traffic. Mr. Ball, all right now, you heard no sound of no rifle fire or anything. Mr. White, no, sir. Here is where he compounds the lie. Mr. White, as soon as the train passed. As soon as the train passed? Where is the train? There is no train. There's no train here. If there is no train, how could you wait for it to pass? This was a railroad switching yard, and the speed limits were quite limited here, so we don't see it to the north. Well, perhaps then we can see this train to the south of the triple underpass. If we look from the point at which Frank Consolare took his picture approximately 20 seconds after the final shot, we can look at almost a half a mile into the distance to the south. However, these photographs alone aren't my only reason for believing that Officer White lied, for I have interviewed a living witness. Here, let's return to Robert Davison, who was at that time a 32-year-old university-educated engineer and Southern U.S. sales manager for the Victor Comptometer Adding Machine Company. Robert, could you please tell us how you came to be on the triple underpass that day?
Well, my office in Dallas was a half a block north of Main Street. and he was due to come through the middle of Dallas on Main Street at 12 noon. And I came down from my office about 11:30 to give myself time to find a place to stand to see him. Well, when I got down there, they were standing at least 10 deep on the sidewalks, and I'm not 8 feet tall. I knew I couldn't see a thing. So I quickly got to thinking, well, my car was just half a block away on Elm Street in a parking lot. So I went and got the car, and I drove down Elm Street. There was very little traffic, and went underneath the railroad bridge on Elm Street, and I pulled off on the grass to get my car out of the way so I wouldn't be in the way of the motorcade. And I climbed up a very steep incline to get up to the railroad tracks. That bridge is a railroad bridge. And it took me quite a while to get up there, but I finally did. And I walked toward the Elm Street Bridge.
As you approached the actual overpass, did anyone challenge you?
And there was a policeman standing there. And I asked him, I said, would it be all right if I stood here and watched the motorcade? And he said, sure, not a problem. We got to talking about the weather and the crowd of people and one thing or another. And it just so happens that is the only overpass on the entire route that the motorcade took that does not have a screen in front of it.
Overpass, nobody challenged you?
Nobody challenged me at all. This man, this policeman, I'll say, quote, policeman, I assumed he was a policeman. He was very friendly. And he said, no problem. You stand wherever you want to.
Dallas officer J.C. White, who was located on the west side of the Triple Underpass, testified before the Warren Commission that he heard no shots nor saw President Kennedy struck because there was a big, long freight train going by. Did you see any train?
Railroad traffic had been stopped, both southbound trains and northbound trains. There was no railroad traffic.
I believe this very stupid lie on the part of Officer White is especially important, as he and the never identified mystery three-wheeled officer on Main Street are the two officers located closest to the Commerce Street arcade shooter's escape route. In addition, this mystery officer has Main Street closed at a point that does not appear on the original plan as drawn up by Captain Lawrence. Why does this mystery officer have Main Street closed here when it is already closed up at Houston? His position in no way could impede the president's route. And they certainly couldn't have worried about people getting too close to the president. Look at these crowds all along Main Street. They were, in fact, at least 10 people deep.
Right, we've got about 10 minutes of the video left, Charles, and there's a lot of questions come in. Let me put some of those questions to you now then. And viewers, keep your questions coming in. We do have another guest coming in. We've got Charles Seeger, part 2, Old School Liverpool Gangster, after this. But I think we need to get some of these questions, start getting some of these questions to Charles, because quite a few of them have come in already. And all right, so Matt Miller is asking, does this lead to a particular group or individuals who committed or covered up this crime, in your opinion?
What I tried to do here was just to establish beyond doubt that there was a conspiracy, not who was behind it. I spent a year of my life on this, and that's for someone else to go further. But I will say that absolutely members of the Secret Service and the armed forces were involved. And when I say the armed forces, I mean Bethesda Hospital and the chain of command up to the Joint Chiefs. I do that because of the silence of the Secret Service officers, of their own breaking of their own rules in terms of the motorcade, their silence about the bullet hole through the windshield, which was clearly visible, and by all the nonsense that went on with the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
All right, so Pearl's wondering about the American government, the CIA, wanting to use terror tactics against its own people and blaming the Cubans to get Castro out, but JFK said no. Did you hear anything about that?
Yes, again, I don't doubt any of that. That wasn't my purpose in this video, but I will address one part of that, as this was a classic misdirection crime and very, very cleverly planned. There, as with all misdirections or magic tricks, which is essentially what this was, there has to be a backup in case the first part of the trick fails. So there had to have been, for the second shooter, a backup story should he have been seen or caught. And I suspect he would have had to have been Cuban to ultimately blame this on either the Soviet Union or Castro.
Charles, how long did it take you to put together this video?
A year of my life.
And you've done several videos that are over an hour long, haven't you?
Yes, it's basically the same version of this. I'm not a producer. I have really no interest in being a JFK researcher. I just remembered Mr. Kennedy as a small boy when this happened. I became interested in it, and I discovered this. And in some ways, I'm almost sorry that I did discover it, because it has caused me no end of misery. Because people are so skeptical about this second shooter, because they have theories. And I can't help that. I didn't enter this with a theory. I just took the evidence I found and went from there.
So the 4 videos on your channel, then, are they all variations of this video?
They're variations, but the one I would recommend is the longer version of this video, because the pictures aren't edited. And in this video, we appear to have one little audio problem. And I will redress that real quickly by saying where the audio was missing, it's a picture of the limousine, and usually either General Ted Wheeler or, excuse me, I have that last name wrong, but General, there was an Air Force general, Army general, or both Kennedy's personal aides, who always rode in the center of the limousine during out-of-town motorcades in the center seat, and they were both empty that day from the center position. Had they been there, shooting Kennedy from the front would have been impossible. So their not being there was very unusual, to say the least.
So Susan wants to know, was LBJ involved in your opinion?
Just an opinion, absolutely. Texas, Dallas was his town.
TTT Tractor is asking, have you been threatened because of your investigation?
You know, no, I haven't been threatened, and I'm not worried about that, because at this point, I know so little. The only thing I worry about is I would encourage anyone out there with the financial means, as this is the first time this has really been broadcast to the public, to buy a copy, the high resolution copy of this photo from Getty Images before it is scrubbed by the deep state, because it would be so easy to do. Getty Images, I don't believe even at this date, knows that they have this image in the photo, and they will probably learn that from this presentation once it's widely circulated. So if someone could go in and buy the highest resolution photo, copy of the photo, that would certainly help preserve this evidence.
Susan's wondering whether the flash on the grassy knoll was a firecracker diversion.
Absolutely, that's all it was. It was a firecracker diversion.
Okay. Pearl wants to know your view on Operation Mongoose. Do
Not
you think it
familiar-
was
I'm not familiar with that term.
okay? Devil Doll is asking what was the range?
I think it was roughly, I actually used to know exactly. I had scaled it out. It was about almost a dead center shot from either the School Book Depository or the Commerce Street Arcade. I believe it was in a range of 170 or 180 feet.
Okay, and let me just go back to the questions. Let's see. Do you think Trump will release information about the JFK assassination?
I have no idea. I would hope so because he's next in line.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen. Do you plan to do an analysis of the attempts on him?
No, this took a year of my life, and one of these is enough. I'll leave. I could give people who want to continue this research some hints of where to go, but I've had enough. Thank you.
And prior to the year you spent on this video, how many years did you spend reading about JFK and researching JFK?
I got interested about 40 or 45 years ago, and I had never traveled to Dallas before. So for the 60th anniversary of the assassination in 2023, I went to Dealey Plaza for the first time, and I simply crossed the street. And I'd like to emphasize that to people. I am just a person of average intelligence, but I had one thing going for me that most people don't. I think for myself. I don't believe what I'm told. And that's all this was. It was just simple curiosity. I walked across the street. I walked into that little tunnel there, which I'm calling the Commerce Street Arcade. And when I saw what was there, I literally said to myself out loud, when I saw the steel utility cabinet, I said to myself out loud, you have to be shitting me. I knew right then how it was done. And that's what prompted me to buy the high resolution picture, where I have to feel that the God's hand is in this. I really do.
So
Because I'm just not that clever.
So you've got almost 50 years invested in following, researching, reading about JFK.
Oh, off and on as a hobby, as maybe but not full time. No, just the 1 year. But I did put a full year on this, and I'm not a professional producer, so this was all amateur production. So I hope people forgive any of the foibles in it.
People are asking if you know anything about the Clintons or the Bushes' involvement.
Oh, I don't think the Clintons were involved. That's for sure. The old man Bush, they go way back all the way through Prescott. Bush was one of the worst guys ever to hit the country, but I have no knowledge of their direct involvement. No.
Yeah. So for the viewer asking about Bush Senior, then that's Georgie. I think it's in my book, Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies, where we talk about Bush on the day of the assassination and the aftermath. He made some strange reports to the authorities and suggested a suspect. Very bizarre behavior, but there's a lot of theories swirling around there.
Yeah, and again, I don't go there. What I wanted to really emphasize with this production and this presentation was when I was a young person in school, probably 70 or 80% of the American people believed a conspiracy had killed the president. And now with younger, more gullible people, that has dropped down to about 50%. And I wanted to demonstrate that it isn't probable that President Kennedy was killed by conspiracy. It is an absolute fact. And there is no statute of limitations on murder.
Indeed. All right. You're getting asked about who was at the grassy knoll.
I don't know.
Someone who released a firecracker, apparently.
It was someone in the plot. There was definitely a plot member there. Also, the person with the umbrella, I believe, was the signalman. The signalman's
Again,
job was, had Kennedy been killed with the first shot, I don't think there would have been a firecracker at the grassy knoll. And you have to remember, back in 1963, fireworks were everywhere in America. And one other thing about 1963 is everyone smoked. Everybody had a cigarette lighter. Very easy to do.
you're getting asked about if you know who the extra shooters could be.
No, I have no idea.
JP wants to know, what do you think about the 3 hobo picture, the hobos?
I can't comment on that intelligently. I'm pretty skeptical that if they had anything to do with it, they certainly weren't shooters, but I doubt they had anything to do with it, really. I think it was just coincidence.
Teddy's wondering whether a Fed could have been firing from the grassy knoll.
It'd been a really bad idea, and here's why. If they had been firing from the grassy knoll and had missed, the worst thing that could happen is to have missed, try to kill Kennedy and not get the job done. But there's one thing worse than that. If they had tried to kill Kennedy, not got the job done, but killed Jackie accidentally. And that would have been so easy to do, shooting at a crossing target. Even people who didn't like Kennedy would have, if they had hit Jackie, would have given him permission to declare martial law and catch them. She was very much admired, even by women all over America, and men for that matter. So no, the grassy knolls are very bad. It was an excellent place for diversion, terrible place to shoot from.
WBR is saying that the driver shot JFK, and your thoughts on that?
No, the angles are wrong.
SWA is saying, on film, the bullet goes straight up and his wife doesn't even flinch. She was grabbing a loose bullet that fell or casing, not his brains.
Well, I can only say that we'll have to disagree with that. I don't know that high-powered rifle bullets simply bounce off people and stay there. Casing, I don't know where it would have come from a rifle from some distance. I do believe it was part of his brain matter on the trunk, but we'll have to agree to disagree.
DC wants to know, how many autopsies were there, and can any of them be relied upon?
There was only one autopsy, and no, it cannot be relied upon. Again, I'm not going to go in that, but there is a wealth of information on that. There's an excellent book done years ago by a man named David Lifton called Best Evidence, and other people have followed up with that. Kennedy's body was checked into Bethesda Hospital at 3 different locations at 3 different times on that evening. It's fascinating, but again, I don't go there. That's for somebody else to spend a year of their life on.
Debbie wants to know, what about a shooter from the sewer drain?
Never was one. The angles are wrong. The angles are impossible. Again, I just go with the geometry.
Raymond wants to know why you think Kennedy was targeted.
Money. Somebody somewhere, or multiple parties, be it military-industrial complex, international bankers, Lyndon Johnson and his cohort, all kinds of people had all kinds of money and power to grab. Money. Always follow the money.
Money, power, geopolitics, war. So Amy's asking, were the same actors involved with the RFK assassination?
That I don't know. I would only be speculating.
I imagine it's the same invisible hand, though, guiding it. So
there you go. Same, maybe not the same individual actors, but the same power centers.
yeah. Mary's asking, how and from which bullet did Governor Conley get injured?
That would be the second bullet that Lee Oswald fired, or the third bullet overall. It hit the branch in a tree. There were trees all along there. Oswald shot through the trees, hit one of the trees, which deformed and caused the bullet to fragment and sprayed those metal fragments all over the inside of the windshield, and tumbled and entered actually Connolly's shirt horizontally. Not the bullet ended Connolly's shirt sideways. You can see it. It hit him. It must have just hurt like the dickens. But Oswald's second shot and third overall.
Lizard saying, Charles, enjoyed the presentation. What do you think on Gianni Russo? And he was on the podcast, our podcast on this channel about 4 years ago, who claimed it was a mob hit and he knows who done it.
That's bullshit. Excuse me, but were there mobsters involved? Yes, easily mobsters involved, but they did not have the power to control the autopsy.
Yeah, sometimes the CIA contract the mafia.
Yes, indeed, there could have been. Ruby had all kinds of. He was a small-time mobster, but to kill the president of the United States, they don't have that kind of power.
Quite a few people are asking about whether Freemasons were involved or whether JFK was a Freemason.
I don't believe JFK was a Freemason. Could there have been Freemasons involved? If they were, that wasn't their primary motivation. It would just have been incidental. This was about money, huge amounts of money, military contracts. It's rumored that Kennedy and Khrushchev had almost blown up the world in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons. And that was something that what we now call the deep state just couldn't put up with. Trillions of dollars have been spent since then, trillions. It's unimaginable how much money was at stake.
Ron's asking, why did Jack Ruby have to get involved?
I don't know. Well, he had to get involved because Oswald was supposed to be dead. Somewhere the plan went awry after the shooting. Oswald had to be silenced, and somebody screwed up somewhere.
I think you just answered the next question. Was Oswald meant to be killed right away to remove the patsy?
Absolutely.
All right, let's finish the film then, and then we'll have a few minutes to do any final questions before our next guest comes in, Charlie Seeger, Old School Liverpool Gangster Part 2. So here we go with the film.
So why did this officer needlessly close Main Street here? He did it as an essential part of the plot to provide the Commerce Street assassin with an unimpeded field of fire, a perfect killing zone, as we can see in this frame of the Patsy Pascal film. Main Street is wide open. If they had not set up this impromptu roadblock, they easily could have encountered this or this. So how were those individual officer assignments made? According to Captain Lawrence of the Accident Prevention Bureau, he toured the route with Assistant Chief Batchelor, who decided upon how many officers would be placed and where. But according to Captain Lawrence, he was given no names of specific officers. So that was either left up to Captain Lawrence, or he delegated those selections to his lieutenant and or sergeants. The final assignment plan from Dealey Plaza West is as follows. At Main and Houston, 3 officers under the supervision of Sergeant Harkness. At Houston and Elm, 3 officers. At the Triple Underpass, Officers Foster and J.C. White. At the Stemmons Freeway Overpass, Officer Murphy. At the railroad overpass over the Stemmons Freeway, Officers Lomax and E.B. Brown. And finally, at the Stemmons Freeway overpass at Industrial, Officer Shankles. Now here's the fascinating part. Right in the middle of these assignments, there is no assignment or order for any officer to have created an unauthorized roadblock west of the Triple Underpass on Main Street. And yet here it is, manned by our mystery officer. But since they blocked Main Street, why didn't they block Commerce Street also? I think the plotters would have liked to have closed off Commerce Street completely, but other than the lane along the left curb, they didn't, as Commerce was a major one-way arterial that ran through downtown Dallas and did not interfere with the motorcade route. They didn't have an excuse to close it. But I do suspect that one or more Dallas police were stationed on Commerce west of the Triple Underpass to prevent any large trucks or buses from entering Dealey Plaza, which would block the second assassin's line of sight. This probably would have been controlled by Officer J.C. White, who have had a clear view of the presidential approach, as well as a visual contact with any officers on Commerce Street. All large trucks or buses would have been stopped, that is, except for one very special truck, which, if it wasn't part of the plot, represents perhaps one of the luckiest coincidences in the history of crime. Here's why. Although a good firing position for the second assassin, the Commerce Street arcade was not perfect. It had two flaws. Although it did provide a clear field of fire, that could be obscured by any large vehicles. Any pedestrians on Commerce Street or normal passenger cars could simply be shot over the top of because of the height of the assassin. The second, more serious flaw in the position was the lack of the assassin's concealment from directly east, and especially from the gathered crowd and police at the corner of Main and Houston. That's where the appearance of this truck, seen here in the Zapruder film only 2 seconds after the fatal headshot, proves so fortunate for the plotters. Looking from Zapruder's location, if we line up the lamppost as it intersects with the truck cab and then transfer that to a scale drawing, we can exactly locate that truck's position in Dealey Plaza in regard to the second assassin's location and the crowd and police at the corner of Main and Houston. Now, looking from the Commerce Street assassin's position toward the corner of Main and Houston, if I now insert a scaled image of a similarly sized truck, you can see that the truck would have provided nearly perfect concealment of the shooter from the crowd located at Main and Houston, yet without in any way obscuring the assassin's line of sight as the president's limousine approached directly toward him on Elm Street. Do you believe this truck's appearance exactly at this point was simply a coincidence? This truck, which I believe to be a 1958 or 59 International Harvester Model 264 and outfitted with a hydraulic lift on the back, is interesting for one more reason. It has no commercial or advertising markings, nor does it appear to have any gross vehicle weight markings visible, as is required by law. Please note that what appears to be a white patch above is actually a small traffic sign affixed to the intervening light pole. Pictured here about 20 seconds after the fatal shot, the truck has moved forward approximately 3 car lengths. At the same time, the second assassin has already replaced the murder weapon in the steel utility closet and can be seen in the third portal of the Commerce Street arcade, escaping to the west. He is carrying a stepladder, held upside down and resting on his right shoulder in a manner like this reenactment photograph. For your inspection, here are a couple more magnifications of the image, both highlighted and tinted to help you more easily recognize the assassin in flight.
Wow.
To recap, once having replaced the weapon in the closet, the killer would have escaped out the western portal of the arcade into the small gravel parking lot, while both the crowds and police converged first on the grassy knoll and then upon the Texas Schoolbook Depository. I found this image as a result of simple curiosity. I had no theories and no agenda. I tried to share my discoveries and conclusions based upon simple logic honestly, and yet in spite of that, I'm forever confronted by the JFK experts who slavishly worship at the shrine of the god of the grassy knoll. If you learn nothing else from my foregoing efforts, I do at least hope you will be left with this. The shooter on the grassy knoll never was anything more than 2 bits of smoke from a lousy firecracker.
And we can wrap it up there.
Well, yeah, let me go back. Where's the photo again? Let's have a look. Let's get the photo back up. Yeah, there we go.
Recognize the assassin.
Pull it back up here.
In flight. To recap,
So that was the photo of the second shooter. Yeah. All right. What would you like to say to the viewers in conclusion then, Charles?
I would like people to, if they would like your presentation of this, I think you did a wonderful job. I wanted to thank you, as I've contacted over 140 bloggers or news media organizations, and they have all blown me off like I'm talking about the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, and you had the decency and the curiosity to be gracious enough to give me a chance, and I hope people will spread this far and wide. I don't want to make any money from this. I just remember President Kennedy when I was a small boy, how much I and my family thought of him. And I'm a patriot, and I'd like to see my country be free again. We haven't had a freely elected president, including the present one. We have not had a freely elected president since President Kennedy.
So Charles has got his own channel, and there's a version over there that's got some pictures we had to take out because of community guidelines this evening. So I'll put the link into the live chat if people want to go over to Charles's channel and subscribe. And you know, you've invested so much of your life in this, Charles. Will you be doing any more videos on this subject?
If anyone out there would be kind enough to let me, I'd like to do several more. I do not want to be a professional blogger or video person. I simply want to get this evidence out to not only the American people, but the free people of the world everywhere, that they can know the truth, that this was not probably a conspiracy. It was absolutely a conspiracy.
And the fact that all these people denied your, giving you a platform to show this just adds to that, I believe.
It does. And one of the most interesting things about human nature is a lie can be unintended, which is to say, we believe fables for so long. The grassy knoll was every bit as much as effective a cover-up by well-meaning people as anything the CIA or the FBI ever did, because there was never anyone there. It was a diversion. All people had to do was what I did: look across the street.
Right, we'll have to end there, Charles. Thank you for coming on. I'll close the show, and get in touch with us if you've got any more information or if you'd like to come on again.
Grand having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Cheers. All right, so Charles's link is in the description box, folks. Please support his work. Check out, the unedited version that he's got over there. Yes, Charles is very humble and sincere, and altruistic motives, no hidden agenda. And we've got Charlie Seeger Part 2 coming next. And we're going to customize over to it from this video. If not, just hit the channel link, channel icon, and it will take you right over. Fascinating account from the old school Liverpool gangster, Liverpool crime. He was the first safe blower in the country, and he has very detailed anecdotes. So enjoy the rest of the evening, folks. We've got an hour plus of